Welcome to another episode of Jewish Jesus Jamboree, where again our goal is to celebrate the Jewishness of Jesus. No! You are going to hurt somebody. We're not doing this again. Oh!
It's Jewish Jesus Jamboree. Bow!
Once again, I have been outdone by an MFSP. The attempt on my life has left me scarred and deformed. But I assure you, my resolve has never been stronger. So try not to be distracted by this. Instead, try to focus on my good eye, which happens to be the subject of today's video. Let's get started. Many moons ago, I read something in the Bible that left me completely confused. I was reading in Matthew chapter 6, right in the middle of Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, when he's telling his followers about how they should handle money and resources in his kingdom. He starts by telling them to give to those in need and to do it in secret. Then he talks about how we should pray and fast. Then he reminds them not to store up treasures here on earth that will fade away, but to store up treasure in heaven, which will never fade away. Then, in the middle of all that, he starts spewing some nonsense about your eyes. He says, "Your eye is a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is good, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is bad, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is." So I read that over and over and over and over. I Googled it, I looked it up, I read stuff, then I asked my friends, but nobody's answer satisfied me. Once again, we find a naive English-speaking American male trying to take the words of a 2,000-year-old Jewish book literally, only to find himself completely and totally confused. Some people say this is literally about taking care of your physical eyeballs. Other people talked about how he's saying that you need to be careful what you look at, and yeah, that's important, but that doesn't really make sense in the context of the rest of this chapter. So then I went on a quest for truth, and in that quest, I found this book. This is the New Testament written by a Jewish guy who knows Jesus, but who wanted to restore the Jewish flavor to the Bible. He says that the Bible's been translated and retranslated by Western scholars so many times that it's lost its Jewishness. It's full of cool Hebrew words, and all the people and places have their Hebrew names too, which I think is pretty fun. Check it out.
Yeshua, Shlomo, Galil, Yerushalayim, Yehuda, and Ever Hayarden. Avraham, Yeshach and Yaakov. Perushim, Shabbat. Yochanan, Nia Mercer. Ruach HaChodesh. Talmudim. It also has a little section on every page to tell you what all those words mean.
And it also has some little parenthetical bits that explain the meanings of phrases and figures of speech. So then I combined what I learned in this book with what I learned in this book, which is also a cool book about Jewish things. And I finally got my answer. And it turns out that some of the things that Jesus said were first century idioms that we know nothing about. Speaking of idioms, I don't want to beat around the bush here. So let's just throw caution to the wind and address the elephant in the room. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, so I'll just bite the bullet and let the cat out of the bag. It turns out, having a good or bad eye has very little to do with your actual eyes. But before I tell you what it does mean, I think it's time for a break. A trick shot break. This isn't working. Showtime. Sports! This is the second floor out the window splashy pants.
two-wheeled toddler throwdown. You ready, Gracie? She's ready. Time to go big.
That's the one.
Let's go big.
Well, you can't make them all, I suppose. Now let's find out what this eye thing is all about. In Jewish culture, saying that someone has a good eye means that they're always looking out for the needs of others and being generous to the poor. And having a bad eye means that they're greedy, selfish, and blind to the needs of those around them. And this isn't the only time Jesus uses this idiom. He uses it again in Matthew chapter 20 in the parable of the vineyard workers. Comment below where you think having a good eye or a bad eye fits into that parable. The idea of having a good or bad eye is closely connected to the Hebrew word ra'ah. Fun fact! Hebrew is what's known as a word-poor language. The ancient Hebrew language has about 8,000 words in it. In comparison, the Oxford English Dictionary defines about 600,000 words, though people say we have about 1 million in the language. Having so few words means that a lot of Hebrew words have to mean more than one thing to get their point across. So a lot of the time, a Hebrew word will attach a mental activity to a physical outcome. Sort of like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So for instance, the Hebrew word ra'ah not only means to see something and acknowledge its existence in front of you, but it also means to go and act on what you've seen. So if you were like, hey, did you see that kitty stuck in a tree? And I saw the kitty with my eyeballs, but I didn't actually go and help the kitty, then I would say, I saw the kitty, but I didn't really see the kitty. In Genesis 22, when Abraham goes up the mountain to sacrifice his only son Isaac because God told him to, but then at the last minute, God stops him and doesn't make him sacrifice his own son and instead provides a ram for him to sacrifice. Abraham names the place Yahweh Yireh, which means the Lord will provide. And the word Yireh comes from the word Ra'ah, so it literally means the Lord will see. Because on the mountain, God saw Abraham's need and then he met his need. So having a good eye means that you see the needs of others and you meet the needs of others. They go together. So we can see why Jesus said that having a good eye fills your whole body with light, because you're not focused on yourself, but instead you're focused on the needs of those around you and being generous with the things that God has given you. And on the flip side, having a bad eye fills our whole body with darkness because we're not thinking about the needs of other people. We're only thinking about ourselves. We're being selfish and greedy and prideful, which, by the way, is the root cause of every single sin we ever commit in our entire lives. It's pride. Because we want to do what we want to do, and we don't want anybody to tell us otherwise, not even God. And having a bad eye also means that we're being completely stingy with what we have, we're totally focused on material things, and we're not storing up treasure in heaven by serving others. And Jesus modeled for us what having a good eye really looks like. He lived a life of selfless humility and generosity in the highest form possible. He was God, and yet he was willing to leave his throne in heaven, come to earth, be born as a human, and for 33 years he gave of his time, his efforts, his resources, and ultimately his life for people who could never repay him. Jesus had a very good eye, and he expects the same of his followers. All we have to do is get our eyes off of ourselves and start looking out for the needs of those around us. And the awesome thing for those of us who are followers of Jesus is that he's given us his Spirit to live in us and help us do that very thing. Piece of cake. Easy as pie. The ball's in your court. Okay, no more idioms. That's going to be it for this episode. To make a long story short, I hope you don't think I'm off my rocker and we can see eye to eye on this. Because this kind of cultural misunderstanding does not just come along once in a blue moon. But JJJ exists to keep this kind of thing at bay. So please, jump on the bandwagon. Because it takes 2 to tango.
It's a Jewish Jesus Jamboree. Ba-da-ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum.
By the way, if you're an observant person, you probably noticed that the backdrop changed here in the studio. If you're in the loop, you know what it is. If you're not in the loop, you don't know what it is. Either way, next week, you'll all be in the loop. See you later.